Welcome to the program. There are so many areas of media that we can talk about, but we are in a new paradigm and have been for some time now, where it's not just about how you receive information or what sources you receive information from. We're now in an era where the information itself is an important part of the conversation. Is it misinformation? Is it disinformation? Who's receiving it? Who's giving it? Are there influencers? Are they influencers on a social media platform? And who's behind that social media platform? How do online videos play a role in our space and how we consume content versus online articles? What does it mean to talk about new media, mobile media? What is the difference between international media outlets and local or regional media outlets or just national ones? And what's happening in the online advertising space today? Because if advertisers are driving so much of the trends behind media and what's being presented, shouldn't we understand what their goals and aspirations are and how they see the world? So there's so many areas of media that we need to talk about and so many trends that are changing so quickly. We had to find a true expert to cover the topic, and we have done that. Louisa Ha joins us today. She is a professor of research excellence in the School of Media and Communication at Bowling Green State University in Ohio in the United States. She's the founding editor in chief of Online Media and Global Communication and also the former editor of Journalism and Mass Communication Quarterly, the flagship journal of the Association for Education in Journalism and Mass Communication. She's the founder and chair of the Emerging Media Research Cluster in the School of Media and Communications for Bowling Green, and she is the advertising major advisor and internship coordinator for the program. Her research interests cover everything we just talked about: misinformation, social media influencers, online videos, new media business models, social and mobile media use, international conflicts and how they're covered, comparative communications from one country to another, online and international advertising trends, and of course, audience research at the heart of all of it. She holds a Ph.D. from Michigan State University. Louisa was generous with her time with us, and there was so much ground for us to cover. So I don't want to spend too much time teeing up the interview. We want to get right to it. So without any further delay, I present to you my conversation with Dr. Louisa Ha. Louisa, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Welcome for having me.
All right, I gave a little introduction at the top of the program, but no one can introduce themselves quite like the person doing the
Mhm.
introduction. So let me give you a chance to introduce yourself to our audience.
Okay, my name is Louisa Ha. I'm a professor of research excellence at Bowling Green State University in the School of Media and Communication. I'm also a founding editor in chief of an online journal called Online Media and Global Communication.
So we have so much ground that we can cover in our time together, and this topic of traditional media being overtaken by new media, what the meaning of new media is for people, we can go on and on. I will try to keep us focused today, specifically on the big trends that are happening right now, and one of those is just the emergence of the influencer in our habits of consuming media. Social media tends to be the place that we interact with these people the most, but from your perspective and from someone who has looked at this and researched this, give us your sense on why now and why this concept of individual influencers having such an outsized impact on how people are consuming news, information, and online content.
Yeah, I think that people are now too fed up from advertising and other official propaganda. So they want someone who sounds genuine, who are like them, but a little bit knowledgeable themselves. So they would like to listen to those people who are now called influencers, and they are, of course, try in social media. They know how to present themselves very effectively in front of the camera and talk to people in a way that they feel is very helpful and very honest to them. So those people are the one that people now seek opinions from because don't trust any of the typical traditional media anymore. So that's why I think that the social media influencers create their own niche by being to be genuine and being to be like one of them. So they are like a friends, but a distant friend of the listeners or the users.
And when you think about why traditional channels lost as much trust as they did, and it feels like they lost it pretty quickly, is there any one event or maybe a series of events that you think really changed people's perceptions about those traditional sources of information?
All right, I think that there are a lot of big scandals in the past several years about how people like use advertising to do false advertising and negative attacks, which shows that they are not really genuine anymore. They are just people pay money to say whatever they want, right? So that's very important. And also in media too, also there are too much advertising interruption. People are fed up with advertising clutter. They just don't want advertising infiltrated into their editorial content. So they want to seek something else. They want someone who give them the honest opinion about products or about services or things that they should do. So they want to look for people as alternative sources other than the traditional advertising and mass media type of content.
So as people looked for these alternatives, it they looked away from institutions and they looked for individuals. What are some of the key elements that make a successful influencer?
I think that, of course, I'm not an influencer myself, but I would say that they have several characteristics that they have. Typically, the perceived authenticity of these people, they always are able to talk about their life. It's almost like a testimonial of their life. They show their lives to people, and people see that, oh, this is real life. Look at this, a person that like this kind of thing and do this kind of things. So I want to emulate them. I want to be like them. I want to listen to what they advise us. So I think this type of um, presentation is make them very seems to be very candid, very authentic that they could trust. So the trustworthiness of these people to the users are what make them so influential.
And that's fascinating though, because it people can see through some of the veneer of a company that may have other motivations for putting content in front of you. But of course, individuals do much the same thing, and they may very well be manipulating and tapping into parts of people that are not authentic, but they present it as authentic. And we've seen that certainly. We've had some scandals. We see elected officials, politicians do this all the time. So, are you seeing anything in your research about how audiences determine whether an influencer that somebody else trusts is going to be one that they trust? What is the filter that an audience puts on someone to determine whether they'll listen to them or not?
A lot of times it's called the self-congruence, whether they see themselves similar in the views to the influencer or not. For example, Donald Trump is an important influencer, even though some people may not like him, but he is an important social media influencer, especially when he was still have the social media platform. When he was so have so many followers on Twitter, and then people believe in him, and he make a lot of claims, and to those followers, he's making true statements. But of course, some other people would have different opinions. So there's a lot of self um, determine what is true or not. And it's very hard to determine sometimes, especially opinions is always depends on how you interpret the facts. The same fact can be interpreted by two different people totally differently. So so that's why a lot of times we find that influences actually is a indirect reflection or projection of the individual themselves. But those people are, of course, they are more articulate, they are more successful in presenting themselves than others. But they are actually reflecting the person's own wish and own ideology.
Now, one of the things that's really fascinating about information today isn't just how many individual sources there are, but it's all the different channels through which you may receive them. So, if we use TikTok as an example, there's an entire generation that has no idea what it is. They don't know how to use it, they
Mhm.
don't download it, they don't understand it. But there's another generation that's primarily getting their information from that channel. How do you think that that is going to play out in our society, not just at the political level? But let's even talk about how we gather facts and information. If you've got one segment of society turning to a channel that another doesn't even know exists, is there any historical precedent for something like this?
I think the gap is so great nowadays than 50 years or 100 years ago before. In the past, maybe, okay, like radio TV is a new thing at that time. Also, the younger people are more likely to know about it. But at least it is a family medium that they could all enjoy at the same time. But like TikTok, most of them, they are using it individually, okay, at the bed or something like that. So the families do not talk about with each other about what they consume as a content. So there's no common base. Like, for example, I also have a hard time in communicating with my daughter because the source of content that she get from is only from social media. But I have more than social media. I use social media, but not just social media. So already there's a gap. And I think that's even more and more important that people have to understand that now we don't have the common media anymore. They have different media, even social media. They are very different. Some people use Instagram, some people use X, some people use Facebook. Not everyone uses the same. But the same group of people, they're friends, they will use the same. So you must be in that circle to use the same social media to know among each other what's going on.
And that seems to be getting more prevalent. I mean, I feel like every 6 months there's another next big social media community, channel, platform. So, do you get the sense that that's actually getting even more separated, that there's even more insular groups of people as these new platforms emerge?
Yeah, definitely. There are some that are, we will call them fat type of platform, like, for example, Be Real. Okay, Be Real. I don't know whether how long it would last. Maybe it may last for a long time, but it may be also be a fad. Right now, it is popular. And the thing is that all these platforms, they try to get attention and try to get prominence by having some features that are very cool at that time. Okay, just like Snapchat, they have been very cool with the streaks and so on and so forth. But then after a while, then people can get used to it, and then they look for some big new things. But there are some stable things that is important, like, okay, Facebook has been around for several decades now. So why it can be so successful for lasting that long, because they have keep on having new features. So some platforms are more successful than others in keeping their audience engaged and modify the platform so to adapt to the new changes in the environment. But some are less able. They just have one big feature and then gone. So they could not last long. So I think that for a researcher like me, I look at platforms more from a long-term basis, that they have some more sustaining element that would keep the audience for a while, not just only one time, but they can also maintain some sort of community large enough to create the impact on the community, not so individualized things.
Now, I'm curious how traditional media companies have tried to make adjustments to this. The example I like to use in the United States is our public broadcaster here, NPR's, our National Public Radio. When the advent of podcasts came around, a lot of people said, well, that's going to displace radio. But NPR wisely got into that trend, put out programs that they were already airing on the traditional radio, but they put them in podcast form, and they became one of the most subscribed to and one of the most listened to programs and content creators on the Apple iTunes store, for example. So that was one traditional example of a very standard operating broadcast and a nonprofit one at that, using a new media channel and reaching a new audience. But it doesn't seem like other mediums like television or network news or even movie studios have quite been able to crack the code of how to take content that was on the big screen or the small screen and make it relevant for the social media audience. Are you seeing companies that are making that transition successfully? And if so, I'm curious who's doing it well.
I think the streaming part is making changes. In the past, probably they just make it simple, put it online for free, or just keep on the movie theaters and television set. But now with the streaming services, as professional streaming services like Netflix and the bunch of other professional streaming services, now streaming become a new professional source of income for Disney and other Paramount and so on, the other services in Hulu. So I think that it depends. Once they traditional big media, they are willing to adapt and learn how to adapt to the environment and know how to take advantage of their um, own library. It's because they have more content, original content that they own than many other sources. So they could utilize this advantage to the best in making Disney Plus one of the most successful in terms of the streaming services. And I think that Netflix right now is really seeing big competition from them. Although Netflix is very successful internationally, but US, they're really facing tough competition from the other streaming services already.
And then there's companies out there like Amazon who get into the streaming business. They also have their Amazon Music business, but the core of what they traditionally did was a marketplace. So they,
Mm-hmm.
in theory, had a bit of a community, and then they are trying to layer on entertainment to it. And yet they haven't had quite the success on that that a company like Netflix has had because that's the core of what they do. So I'm curious, in your view, do you think that a company like an Amazon that adds on an entertainment service, is that a model that makes sense for the future, or do you feel like it's got to be a company more like Disney or Netflix that's in the business of content and in the business of distribution, and it has to be core to what they do?
I think Amazon has to still find its own niche. Actually, I'm an Amazon user a long, long time. And when they have Amazon Prime Video, I was very slow to get onto. I know that I have that service for free, but the content is not attractive enough for me to change from Disney or some other Netflix to Amazon because it's just not good content. I don't want to waste time on not good content, right? So this is my own opinion. But I think that when now Amazon has some success in terms of like because of the Amazon Prime, they have a large base. So the most important thing that they have tried to do, and but they did not do it very successfully, at least to me, to many other people, is they have a large base of consumers, of subscribers that are using Amazon Prime. How to turn all these Amazon Prime people to become Amazon Prime video users and also using the other services, because also Amazon Prime is not everything free. There are other things that individually charged. So I think that there's some things that Amazon have to do better in terms of content management and content marketing compared to the media giants that know to do it very well in the past, and they have a good library as well. One of the things is that you must have good content. So Netflix also have been investing a lot of money to have original content to attract people to their service because they don't have their own original library. Only until the past few years that they do a lot of their own original content, big titles that attract a lot of people, then they are able to become so successful.
So when we now take a step back and we think about where we're going, right? So we have gone in a very quick, relatively speaking, period of time from a model of shared content. We would all see similar, maybe we didn't all watch the same shows, but we all had access to it. Now we just talked about having these bubbles of content. You have to be in the community to even know what they're talking about, to be looking at the same videos that someone looks at on a Monday night, to have a conversation with them on a Tuesday morning. What do you think is the next iteration of this? Are there just going to be a proliferation of social media channels and influencers on each? Or at some point, does this get so scattered and fragmented that we start seeing some consolidation of these services?
Yeah, I definitely would see the consolidation would be one main trend. There would still be a lot of different niche thing and new thing that come up all the time. But in order to be have the maximize the economy of scale in terms of technology development and uh, to also create that large scale user base, so that all social media have to live on the social user base, large user base. Like matter why they're successful is they have a large user base, okay, and they carry on with their WhatsApp and also with the Instagram. So all this together, they become a huge, important giant that developed a very strong base that they could do other things. But for the smaller individual size, well, they can do something. But if they don't have that scale, what they can do is very limited in terms of the impact or in terms of revenue. Because always in doing media business, revenue is the most important at the end. And how to get the revenue? Either you get a large number of users to use it, with including advertising and sponsors, or you have very good content, very niche content that people are willing to pay high price for it. But right now, there are those very high price premium content will be limited to very small number of providers that have the kind of content. Most others, the content is not as differentiable. Then the scale, the size matters.
And What is the data telling you, or what is the research telling you about how long people stick with any one media type? So, anecdotally, I hear that people switch from streaming services sometimes on a monthly or quarterly basis because there's a show here, then they unsubscribe. There's a show over here, then they subscribe, and they're hopping around. Is that is that routine behavior, or is that something that's more on the exceptional fringe?
I think that there's some people who change around, but there's also opportunity cost from moving around because each platform is a little bit different in terms of their navigation and the system how it works. So there's a learning cost for the user as well. If they hop around, they have to learn a new system every time. So up to a certain point, I think that they will not move around. After they kind of settle, oh, this is pretty good, this is reliable, even though I may pay a little bit more, maybe 10%, 20% more, but I get the comfort of doing it, something that I'm familiar with, something that I can count on, I can get the content I want, then I don't think they would just switch around like that because it's just too much learning cost because there's always the platform navigation is not the same. Only when they are totally the same, there's almost zero learning cost in it, then maybe people still hop around all the time.
Now, when you think about how news and information is being shared, let's take this from a global perspective because some companies have a strong, centralized public television or public media organization, and others less so. And in the United States, we have a large private sector of media that produces content that doesn't have any direct funding from government officials. But it definitely seems like that being a primary source of information for people is diminishing. And now people view, as you said, influencers and others as their primary source of information. How do you see companies and governments adjusting to this new reality that they no longer can rely on just big distributors of content? They themselves have to get into the business of content. Do you see them making that adaptation, or are they slow to make this change?
They're catching up. I think some are more successful than others. For example, I won't say that big media are not working in a social media situation. Almost all social media have the big media accounts. And many people actually now they access big media through social media, not through the traditional platform and the television anymore. So in a sense, the consumption is from a different channel, but they still consume those content. And I think that it's important to understand that now more and more content, and I would call them content entity, they would just have presence in different platforms. And actually, I have a class called Content Strategies and Platform Distribution. It's talk about after you have certain good content, how do you distribute in different ways in different platforms to maximize your impact, to maximize your revenue. That's how it works. So I think that all the big media, if they have the resource, including government, which has the most resources, they definitely would penetrate, try to use a different form of media, including media, social media influencers. They may work with them, or they may provide information to them, or support to them, so that they could be able to disseminate their ideas. And I definitely think that any administration want to be successful nowadays could not just rely on the old spokesperson, the president say whatever. You need to have the support of these social media influencers or people that are active on social media to help you to promote the idea in a way that is from a user's perspective, not from the government's perspective. Then you will get the support.
Now, one of the other trends that all of the new media has introduced to us is the idea that very few people tune into anything live anymore. There's very few live events that become must watch. So, in the United States, for example, the Super Bowl of our football, that's a huge moment here where a lot of people do tune in live. Internationally, the World Cup soccer final is something people will tune in live for. But other than these once a year or once every few years moments, there aren't a lot of moments anymore where people feel like they need to watch the content at the same time. And in fact, to the point that some television shows, which are a huge hit, others won't discover it for 3 years. And then it'll be
Mhm.
great for them. But by that point, the initial moment has passed. When you talk to people who are in the space, How do they think about this time shifting concept that somebody will just digest that content when they have time, but it might be years from now? But if you're a movie studio or you're a television producer, you need to show in a short period of time that this thing that you just released was interesting to people. And that used to be easy to gauge right away. People either tuned in on a Saturday night or they didn't. Now, people may not tune in for 18 months, but in 18 months, they may love what you produced.
Yeah, because one of the things, media buzz, is what the industry is talking about. They want to create a buzz so that people would all want to consume it at the same time. And usually this is the premium users and the premium profit would get from it, because when you do that, then you have the most, well, word of mouth and most interest in it. And the other, at the long tail, that would may take years and years. And especially academic people, we are very used to it, because academic work are typically long time. You don't get instant hit. Usually it take many years from the time it get published. Then people use it and know it and whatever. So, but right now in the media content industry, also nowadays is there are fewer and fewer content that is that big blockbuster hit that only do one time and everybody pay attention to it. Right now, there are a few movies have that, and a lot of movies actually also need to have that long lifetime to get through the whole cycle. So not just the box office, you have to wait like different windows. We call it windows. The movie theater, and then in the pay-per-view business, and then later on in premium cable, and then in online or something like that. So it would be, media industry have to understand that there are different types of content now. Some are only one time, like for example, sports news, they're only one time. But there are more content nowadays is more longer shelf life. And especially the online allow the shelf life of a content to be much longer than before. And it seems to be limitless in terms of how much the content can last on online. As long as you put it online, it may be there for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. So it may be that way. So we have to figure out how to maximize the first premium stage, just the windowing. What's the first premium window that everybody may have the buzz and interest in it? And then later on, then it depends on the content, attraction, and the usefulness, and then it get more people interested in it. And I think that we need to live with it. But a lot of times also people try to also accelerate the speed of dissemination, like in our academic world. It used to be very slow. But now with social media, a lot of the publishers would ask us to publish the article, like our journal, for example. After we have the article published, then we're asked to use social media to promote the article in an easy to understand way, so that people would know, oh, this article exists. And then hopefully the buzz would go on, and then quickly people know about it. It's much faster than in the past that we publish a journal and wait 10 years or 5 years for people to discover it. Now you proactively promote it. So I think the whole world nowadays is called promotional culture. What I call is, when you have something, you cannot just wait for it to get discovered. You have to promote it in an easy to understand way, and through the different means, different platforms, so that people know about you. Then you can maximize the first premium window that most people pay attention to you, and you are most valuable at that time.
Now, one of the hot button issues in the United States, and I think Europe, if I'm not mistaken, has been targeting teens and preteens from an advertising perspective, from a content perspective, because the theory is that this is a group that's still, their minds are still developing. They're very persuadable to any number of ideas, and that we should treat that audience separately as to what they see, how long they're spending online. I know in some countries they're even thinking about limiting usage of certain social media platforms. I'm curious what your take is on this. And we'll, for the purpose of this conversation, let's say in the US standard, at least high school age kids, your 14 to 18 year olds, or maybe those 18 to 21-year-old college kids, where they can be heavily influenced by what they see online. How are companies approaching this question? And have you heard anything from a policy perspective about how the American government or other Western governments are trying to approach this?
Oh yeah, the state government and even the federal government just have a Congress hearing about the streaming service, the social media service, Instagram, how much they hurt young people, or they want to ban TikTok. Actually, many states already have laws to ban TikTok in the U.S. already. So they thought that by targeting certain media and blocking use of those media by young people, then it will solve the problem. But I think that this is another very good way by blocking certain media. You should block the content, not block the media. So if the certain content is objectionable, then you should maybe have some sort of regulations or practices guideline that certain content should not be posted on social media. Just like obscene materials is not allowed, illegal materials not allowed. So making those things as illegal, then you can still have people have access to the content, but not the content that is considered as not acceptable, not allowable, and maybe bad for teens in a certain way. But of course, it's also how to define that standard is always arguable.
Mm-hmm.
That's always difficult, especially when we talk about freedom of speech. How much is it cost? But if we add the freedom of speech with the social responsibility, then I think that we can find a compromise, that we can find some standard that we can all agree upon to in certain situations that we would not allow certain age or people to read certain things because this is not good for them. And actually, I won't think that it's good for adults either. They should not have to see it, but it's just that adults probably will count on them. They are able to control themselves better. But sometimes I don't believe so too. There's some content actually probably should be banned altogether.
Well, and these tools are powerful. I mean, if we use the example of driving a vehicle, we have an age limit. We don't let a 13-year-old drive, and yet a 13-year-old in theory can go on any of these social media channels and engage as if they're an adult, and they receive the same kind of content that you might see from somebody who's older and is able to interpret that better. So it's a fascinating topic, and I'm interested to see where that goes. And even companies themselves that are trying to police this, famously Twitter, now X, they went through a heck of a process trying to determine where their lines were going to be on content moderation. Of course, Elon Musk buys the company, takes down some of those guardrails, but there are still to this day controversies around what appears with an advertisement and what doesn't, what's been promoted on the site to their algorithm and what hasn't been. That's just one example, but every media company is wrestling with this, and they have for as long as there's been forms of media. So it seems like we're ending up in a trend towards more content, letting the users have a say about what they find objectionable and what they don't within the bounds of basic legal decency. But there's also a pushback from plenty in the other argument who say, no, these tech companies have so much power with their platforms, they have to police them and they have to be more stringent about what's allowed and what's not. So, what are you seeing in this space? Are we trending in more of a free speech direction where we're going to let the audience decide and sort of crowdsource these decisions? Or are tech companies being leaned on to start putting in more strict parameters about what they're going to allow on their platforms?
Because I think that for tech company, they have to think about potential consequences to the regulation. Because if they don't police themselves, then someone like the politicians and other entities would try to exert their power because they could not let it continue, especially like the information about misinformation. Okay, misinformation, fake news, and other false information, propaganda that has been propagated in these platforms. If we don't do anything about it, then we would just couldn't be able to differentiate what's the true, what's not true. So that's why it's important that there's some standards that we need to set up. Mutually agree upon, but there's some community standard already. For example, Google have their own community standard. What is considered as acceptable, what's not considered acceptable. Like they could not accept porn, for example. Porn is not acceptable on the platform. So these are some of the things that we can find some community standards that can be acceptable in all by majority of the people. And of course, there's some special situations, and we have to do it on a case by case basis. In those situations, when certain people can see those things, for example, then I think that as long as the academics, academics should play a role in that. The tech companies and governments and other public entities, and anyone who is interested and any group that are specialized and interested in this topic should form some sort of task force to work on the content moderation. Because if there's totally no content moderation, this will be very dangerous environment that you can put a lot of dangerous content, harmful content on people, especially when I mean harmful is really harmful, maybe telling people false information. And like, for example, there's some about killing themselves. How to there was one time that YouTube has several YouTubers show people how to kill themselves in a certain way. So those type of uh, encouraging harmful behavior, we should not allow those to propagate. So how to do that and set up a standard, it really is a very complicated thing. It's not one person or one individual or one government can do it. It probably will require, actually in my own book, I would say that it probably would need international organizations to do this kind of content suggestion, moderation status.
And I mean, is there any, I don't know if you want to call it objective third party or accepted institution that the tech companies would turn to or would be willing to work with to set those standards?
Yeah, I think that first of all is, I think that the tech company themselves, they can form they have some sort of industry organization, but I don't think there is a true one that totally represent all of them. That at least the tech companies should have their own representatives as an association, and then the other is the maybe public interest or pressure groups, the education group that are interested, and then academic researchers who do this kind of research, plus government entities, all together sit together to come up with those standards. Tech companies have their own standard, that's fine, but tech companies sometimes they also did not look for everything because there's something that they overlook. Also, they have some other of their own self-interest they have to take care of. So that's why other people have to also come up with some suggestion as well to make sure it is not just the property of the tech company, the data, the thing that they post, not just the property of the company, but also a public good that we have to consider how it may affect and influence other people in the society in a negative way in particular. But also a
And
positive one too. We should encourage the positive content to be produced more and promoted more. And we need the algorithm to do that, to promote those kind of useful educational content to people.
yeah, and so much of that is the business model of these platforms, right? So when we think about why people create certain content, it's because they're incentivized to do so. That's what gets the eyeballs, that's what works for the algorithms. The more people engage with something, the more emotion that they put into it, and then it becomes its own vicious cycle, positive or negative, but you get an emotional attachment to certain forms of content. And the algorithms seem to be built around that. They're built around designing things that trigger an emotional response from you so that you keep coming back to it, they keep serving it up to you, and you end up in that cycle. But what would the alternative to that be? Because even the old newspaper model was, if it bleeds it leads, right? The more spectacular the headline, we're going to put that on the front page. So I don't feel like this is new. It's just that social media adds such a speed to it that the old days of newspapers and magazines and even your evening television news, it didn't have the speed element, but it still followed the same idea of how to get eyeballs.
Yeah, but I think that the eyeball is just one thing, and there should be other kind of revenue model in addition to eyeballs, and we need to develop those kind of new profit model, because one of the thing is if we just appeal to people the worst instinct, human instinct, weakness, then we are going to be going to a worse world with more technology. But what we should do is get into a better world, but for people to be more polite to each other, more respectful for each other, more tolerant of each other. We should promote those kind of values, and those should be rewarded in the system. And how? Of course, there's a lot of work that we have to do, and especially when we talk about AI, or for example, AI, should AI have all this knowledge? How would it use the knowledge, and how does it turn out the result for people based on the machine learning, the algorithm that they have? So these are very complicated, and definitely would require dedicated people from different parts, different constituents and stakeholders to find some solutions.
So, what business models are either emerging that might meet some of what you're talking about, or even at a broader level, the two models that we've always known to work in media were subscriptions and advertising, and it was always some combination of the two. It felt like for a period of time we were going into a subscription model for streaming services so that you wouldn't have advertising. And then others took the opposite side. We're going to give the content for free, but we're going to serve you up ads. First of all, is it still that these are the two primary revenue models for mass media? And then is there anything else out there, any other revenue stream that's starting to emerge from social channels to streaming services to maybe even traditional media?
Well, that's first of all, right now they're more and more likely towards hybrid model. Like for example, like now Meta is saying that they may consider a subscription model for people who are willing to pay. Then they give a subscription model. They don't need the advertisement. Then they just have the thing. But this one type, okay. But I think that there's another alternative that we should think about. If it is for public good, would there be a possibility, just like the public broadcasting model? Would there be some possibility for some sort of non eyeball driven, but just on based on quality and based on the positive impact it can generate for the education value and other information value for the audience to get supported, get rewarded? I think that's very important because otherwise, as we said, if you just want profit maximization, it would always go through the downstream of getting more and more eyeballs, just emotional, just those type of a lot of not truthful information in order to get to that goal. But if we are able to change our goal to not just only making profit, something else, then probably we would be able to have better content. The technology is going for the better rather than for the worse.
And we know advertisers do have an influence. Now, I don't necessarily think it's the conspiratorial influence that some people like to perpetrate, where they're influencing exact stories in a newsroom. But we do know that at the minimum, advertisers want their content to be seen next to certain types of content and not others. This is the brand safety
Mm.
conversation that Twitter has had to deal with ever since Elon Musk took over and took down some of those guardrails. But at the same time, there are brands that only want to advertise if you have a certain number of, as you said, eyeballs. Just they don't want to advertise with a company or with a content that has a small number of a niche audience. So, where are the advertisers in this conversation? What are they doing to drive these business models and to influence for the positive or for the negative about which platforms are going to be able to survive long term and which models are going to be the most viable?
I think the most for advertisers, they want the value of getting consumers that are interested in their product and will buy the product. Okay, so if you have a million followers, for example, a million, but this million did not turn to turn out to be users or buyers, then it's not very useful. So right now, the field in the business field is talk about targeting. Is whether there may be some groups of individuals or communities that are very conducive for the product, and then look for those communities and product and focus on those audiences rather than just mass numbers. However, mass numbers has one advantage is when your product or service need that one time exposure that everybody knows, that like the Super Bowl type, then that's it. But those are the very few occasions that some companies need that kind of one time, very, very high exposure. But most of the time, they need to build up the trust and interest in the product. And then right now we talk about consumer advocates. Is the consumer like the product and being satisfied? They promote the product for you in their own social media, in their own conversation with their friends. That is the new way of advertising. Not just rely on the traditional advertising. You need the consumers to help you to collaborate, to advertise the product for you. So that should be the new cases. And I think that people have to understand that advertising model has changed. The mass model is good for certain situation, but long term, in develop loyalty, in develop the consumer uh, stickiness to the product. You need that kind of repeated and advocacy of the product.
And the credibility that comes with certain personalities and influencers.
Yeah.
So I'm curious about this topic of propaganda, specifically as we think about it from governments that are influencing populations around the world. We this has always been true. This is nothing that's new to our generation or the current forms. It's simply taking a different format. It's appearing in our lives in a different way. But if we look at some of the conflicts around the world, the information warfare seems to be just as intense as the actual fighting on the ground in some of these
Mhm.
places. How are the companies thinking about the fact that their platforms are being used as part of an information warfare space? And do they work with or do they consult with local or regional governments on any of this? It's a pretty hot button issue in the United States, I think, because of our general belief in overall free speech. But we know that there are governments around the world that use social media platforms to push a narrative that advances their cause in a conflict, as there were at any point in history. But what's different now is the ability for that to spread within seconds as opposed to the longer tail effects of propaganda of the past. How are the companies thinking about this? How are governments thinking about this?
Well, especially right now when we talk about the information warfare, a lot of those warfare actually is coming out from non-government accounts. They are coming out from individuals uh, who may or may not be affiliated with the government, and then we call it public diplomacy. And those kind of people, for example, in the Israeli Hamas conflict, we saw a lot of Palestinian made pro-Palestinian people producing the content. We also see a lot of pro-Israel people promoting content. So both sides have their own propaganda. I would say that I would see them as propaganda in the sense that they have their own position, very clear position, what they're supporting or what they're not supporting. And it depends on what you believe in what they are promoting. Sometimes, especially if you are a neutral stand, maybe it depends on which one sounds more convincing. But if you already have your own stance, then you just see, okay, the side that you support is more convincing than the others. So right now, one of the things is that social media actually, in a sense, help those people who used to be suppressed, and now they may have a voice if they use social media to make up their mind and tell people about the story. And probably in the past, if say about this, imagine this Iraq, this Israel and Palestinian conflict is happened 20 years ago. There's no social media, and most likely, probably people would not be sympathetic to the Gaza people because they don't see it. Those who are suppressed, but not you won't see it. But now, because the people in that area and of support of those areas, they are showing those videos. People now say, "Oh, Gaza in this situation, oh, it's so bad." So people change their opinion. So I think that's very important that now we have more voices than in the past. And of course, some may be true, some may not be true. So we have to use our best judgment in terms of, okay, which content is more likely to be true. And also look at collaborative evidence and so on and so forth to make up our decision whether this is true or not, to believe in which side's propaganda they are doing. And also there's always in a conflict, there's always both sides have their own argument. The most important thing is also what's the consequences, is what is the best solution to it. And I think that the solution actually is a very interesting proposition that we should be open-minded on what we should be doing at the end. Because right now everybody is saying that war is cruel. Okay, yeah, it's good, but what happened? Whoever side win, what happened next? We don't know. So I think that's very important that we have to think about this issue because, like for example, the United Nations never able to come up with a resolution because no one is able to come up with a consensus. Even with the consensus, the U.S. can oppose to it, then they become nobody's consensus. So that's why this is very difficult when nobody is willing to come up with a solution and insist on their own position. There's no way that we can find any international solutions.
Well, and then the other, you know, component to that issue is that you have influencers who are unwittingly taking sides in these, and many of them are not necessarily paid by or even aware of that they're advancing the cause of a group of people who are on these networks who have a specific policy objective that they want to to create. And I'm always fascinated by this because you may have people who are celebrities for the very first time because of something that they've done online, and they sort of earn this position of trust, but they don't really know what to do with it, and they never sought it as a position of trust. They just sought the fame and the eyeballs that come with it. But now they're making statements or they're coming out supporting a position, and they may be activating millions of people of their influencers to follow a certain path one way or the other. This feels like it's a moral issue that's becoming more and more prevalent as we have more and more influencers who have the influence but maybe don't have the experience in knowing what to do with it. Uh, is this something that social media companies think about, talk about? Is there education available for those who reach a certain level and they have a certain amount of followers about what to look for, that you might be being manipulated or pushed one way or another, and to sort of be careful before you make declarative statements?
Yeah, I think that right now the more important thing is people have to understand when you say something, it's not just freedom of speech, but also think about the consequence, what you say, especially if you are an influencer with millions of followers. So when you are not sure about the situation, probably they should refrain from giving their opinion before they get information. If they are knowledgeable and informed about it, yeah, feel free to talk about it, whatever. Because I think a lot of times, like for example, just like sharing information too. Why there's a lot of sharing of misinformation is people don't check. They just okay, well this person seems to be credible to me. I just share whatever. I don't check myself. So that's why how misinformation can be spread so easily because they just share for one another. People are reckless. We are not checking. So if people refrain from sharing things that they are not sure, they don't know, then that will help because then at least those that share things bear some responsibility. And actually, I think that sharing something, you actually have some responsibility to it because no matter what, you are endorsing it. Otherwise, don't share with other people, right? So when you share, you implicitly endorse the content.
When you think about the future now of mass media, take us inside the classroom. I'm curious what you're hearing from your students who are the emerging generation who are consuming media today and will be the decision makers of tomorrow. Where are they spending their time? What questions are they asking you on the topic of media and the future of media?
They always tell us that, well, they use media for entertainment, for socializing. They don't do it for politics, even though we talk about politics and things, but actually they don't use social media so much for politics themselves. But indirectly, they're influenced by those because those people who are on social media, they may have their positions and maybe they express a personal opinion, but then this personal opinion become some influence on their political belief or the position on certain type of conflicts.
So they say that they're not influencing
Yeah,
on politics, but in reality, it's perhaps laying the groundwork
yeah.
for what will later, in their maturity, become their political views.
Yeah, because most of the students will then say that I'm influenced by any politician, anything. They don't say that, but implicitly by socializing themselves with those influencers and among themselves, and they share information, they are actually being influenced by politicians.
How do they view television as a medium? Do they even think of it as television anymore?
No, they basically television is a very if you like broadcast networks, they don't watch it anymore. They only watch the news that they is second hand, third hand shared by their friends. A lot of times they don't news is not a prime importance to them. Basically, they see news, personal news among themselves, like who get a new dress or who get a new car. This is probably they're more important to them than those general politics. However, I think that they also see themselves be part of the society. So if there's like right now the conflict between Israeli and Palestinian, they probably have some sort of a position based on what they see their friends are and their influencer positions taking.
So, based on what you're seeing in the classroom, and you obviously have researched this for many, many years, where do you think, what is the next thing we should be looking for? What's the next big trend, or what's the next big way that we're going to be consuming media?
people still need information sources. They need information no matter what platform. So right now, social media is the one that is easily available and free. So instantly they can do anytime and on demand. Also, when they want it, they can see it all the time. So of course, this is one thing. But I think ultimately they would need someone would need the what to count on, what source they trust. So it's up to how the media, including the modern and new media, old media, develop the trust to the generation and make them easy accessible and understandable to them. Because young people nowadays they have very low attention span. So how to do it in a fast-paced environment that they could accept and understand is important. So why do they like TikTok? Is they like those kind of um, very short and kind of funny and genuine way of presenting things. That's what they like. So in order to get their attention and interest, you have to do it that way so that they would be interested in it. So I think those type of basic understanding of what human wants, and young people are still humans. They still have their needs of they need emotion, they need support, they need a lot of those things as a human being. So as long as we go back to the human side of needs, what do we need? We need support. We need love, we need whatever. So if the medium are able to provide that kind of content and also serve them in a way that they could understand and easily accessible to them, then they would be able to be successful.
My last question is about the role that we still have at the local level. And by local, I mean like small towns, not covered by a major news organization of any kind, no famous people from the community, but people still want to keep up with what's happening in, that town of maybe 6 or 700 people. It used to be that the small town newspaper once a week sort of covered the events, or perhaps if everybody belonged to a common church or something, they'd get their news that way. Is there any innovation happening in that space to keep these micro communities that are outside of big cities connected and engaged?
Yeah, I think that for those that still rely on physical thing that they have a church and something that they it's a common thing they go to. But for those who are online, actually many those rural area people are still online. So they have their own Facebook group, for example. They have their own groups that online groups that they keep in contact with the community. So I would think that the physical contact now is replaced somewhat by online, but it's not totally replaced by that because they still want meeting people sometimes once in a while, like going to church. They want to go meet people in church or meet community events. And also nowadays, these kind of events can be documented, not just in local newspaper, but they can document it in the Facebook groups or any other web page that they have as a community. So sometimes some newspapers, small newspapers' role probably is diminishing because you can do it more efficiently online, as long as the community has the online access. But for those communities that don't have online access, then of course the print medium still play a role, the TV medium still play an important role in maintaining the community.
If people would like to learn more about you, your work, your publications, what would be the best way for folks to learn more or get in touch with you?
They can go to my X account. I still maintain my X account here. It's Louisa Ha at BGSU, and also sorry at Louisa Ha BGSU. Or they can also go to my journals, Online Media and Global Communication, where a lot of people do their different research on online media, the communications on global communication.
Excellent. We will include links to that in the description of this program. Louisa, thanks for taking the time to speak with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me and join the conversation. Thank you very much.
It's very difficult to say where the media landscape is going, but one thing that hopefully you took away from that conversation, certainly that I took away from the conversation, is the terminology media is changing so rapidly that we really don't have the right vocabulary to describe the mass media landscape today. When I was getting into education in my very early years, mass media was basically defined by television and to some degree radio and to some degree newspapers and magazines. But that was basically it. Social media was relatively new. It wasn't used as a major source of news and information. It was social networking, really, just people keeping each other updated on a digital platform rather than in person at your VFW hall or at your church or, among your friend groups like we would have in the past. But all of that has changed dramatically. And so now, where is the line between traditional media and new media? And what is the difference between social media consumption and streaming video consumption? And is there really a difference if you're consuming that content on YouTube versus Netflix versus Hulu or Disney Plus or some other streaming platform? Content is content, however and wherever you receive it. And yet, it's very important for us to understand the business models behind it because it helps understand why some voices are elevated and other voices are suppressed. I would simply offer as an opinion at the end of this program that moderation, content moderation, is and has always been in the eye of the beholder. If you're the person having moderation applied to your content, you view it as censorship. But if you're the person who's deeply offended by a piece of content, you view it as safety, maybe for yourself or for your community. But I think we've spent a lot of time in the public talking about content moderation specific to social media channels. But make no mistake about it, whether you're on X, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, wherever you consume your content, whether it's video content, images, or text, even though you may be thinking about that content moderation on one of those platforms, understand that there's content moderation that happens all the time on traditional television, on traditional cable, on streaming services. There's content moderation that happens in your local newspaper. There's an editor. There is somebody in charge of determining what gets published and what doesn't, and what's on air and what's not, and what position will be shared and highlighted and which ones won't. That has always existed. So, what I would ask all of you to think about as we go into this bold era of ever more ways to receive information is to start thinking about the term content moderation beyond social media platforms. And honestly, to start blending your understanding of social and traditional media because it's all media. It's just content, where it's being consumed, who is saying it, and critically, who is making the decisions behind what voices are elevated and which voices are suppressed. Media at its best responds to the desires of the audience. The audience tells us what they like and what they don't. The audience tells us where they want the content experience to go. The shows that get the most viewers, wherever they're found, those are where the advertisers go. And the programs that maybe the quality of the content is good, but there's just no interest, are the ones that fade away because nobody wants to pay for them and no advertiser wants to be on them. But that's an old way of thinking. You see, in the new world, in the new media, as Louisa was talking about, it's all about finding your niche. And so the idea of mass media is quickly and rapidly disintegrating into micromedia. It's not about putting out content that reaches the largest number of people at a given time. Now it's about putting out specific content that specific groups of people are looking for. And as long as those groups of people have some money, some disposable income that an advertiser can tap into and is valuable for them, and there's some group of products that they would wish to sell to this group of people, it'll succeed. And as long as there is a group of people, as small as it may be, who are passionate about a topic, there will be content on platforms that can serve that. That's not mass media. That's micro media. It puts people into their own small bubbles. Pay attention to this trend closely because I do think that this is the biggest difference in the business models of media going forward than the business models of the past. In the past, all content was about getting the biggest audience that you could find. And yes, you wanted to make sure you can define a niche within that. But for those listeners who are of a certain age in the United States, one of the most popular television shows that ever aired in the United States was a show called MASH. This was also in a time when there were very few television channel options. But it was a show about sort of a satirical look at American troops serving in Vietnam, serving in Korea, actually, and what their sort of experiences looked like. And they took a more or less comical view of the experience. But it was such a huge audience because the show appealed to pretty much everybody in the country in one way, shape, form, or fashion. And it set up a model in which every other show that followed it tried to mimic their formula. Let's put characters on the screen that reflect the people that would be watching so everybody sees themselves in the storylines, they see themselves in the characters, they buy into it, and let's see if we can get 50 million people to watch something at the same time. And that model has been the business model of mass media since the advent of radio, television, and generally newspapers. But in more recent times, where people have a lot more freedom as to where they get their information and what they watch and how they want to be entertained, now it's less about what is everybody interested in and more just about what am I interested in and what is my small micro community, whatever the topic is that we want to be overserved on, what are we fascinated by? So I say all of this to wrap up with one comment that I think the trend is going to continue in that direction, but I challenge you as listeners of this program, I challenge you to avoid that trap. I challenge you to go outside of the normal micro media bubbles that you have, including this community and this show, and go out and find other shows, find other opinions, reach out to other bubbles, see what's happening elsewhere. It's going to be increasingly difficult to have a mass media channel of choice that gives you a flavor of everything. So you're going to have to go outside your comfort zone. So if you're a news consumer and you consume most of your news on TikTok, I challenge you to get some of your news from a news app. Find the ones that you want to try out. Play around with a few of them. If you are somebody who gets your news exclusively from the evening newscast because it's easy for you to find that on YouTube and a replay, I challenge you to find social media sources so that you can see a broader variety of headlines from as many places as you can. I challenge everybody who's listening to this program, if you have a curious mind, the most dangerous thing for you is to get pigeonholed with just one point of view or get your information from only one source. Get it from as many sources as you can find and round out your knowledge and be in as many micromedia bubbles as you can be in. It'll confuse the hell out of advertisers, and you might not get targeted the way that you otherwise would. But isn't that the point? Well, don't we want to be unpredictable? And isn't a curious mind all about learning new things and identifying with people who are not like you and wouldn't buy the things that you would buy and wouldn't go the places you would go and wouldn't do the things that you would do? It is my sincere hope that this audience takes away from this conversation all the different things that are happening in the media landscape so that you can help yourself engage in it and your companies and your nonprofits and your churches and all the groups that you're a part of. But also that you take it as a warning that there are people who want to put you in a bucket. There are people who want to put you into a small, narrow micro bubble. And I think it's important that we fight our way out of that. And part of the reason why this program has as many topics as it does is to avoid the trap of just over serving on one. Even if that's not the best thing for the algorithms, even if it's not the best thing for the social media platforms, I think for this audience, bringing you a wide variety of knowledge, experts, and views is what's going to make us more fulfilled and more knowledgeable and better citizens of the planet. So, with all that in mind, the home of this show is brianjmatos.com. That's where all of our episodes are housed, along with their show notes and links to all of the podcast platforms where you can subscribe to the show, which I encourage you to do. We have links right on the homepage to our show on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, iHeartRadio, and Amazon Music. You can also find us on alternative apps like Player FM and the Odyssey app, as well as a few others. Really any of your choice. And our show is generally hosted on the Libsyn site, and they have their own podcast subscription service as well. I encourage you to find it anywhere you get your podcasts and to find a way to engage with us and subscribe to our program. We make it easy. Just go to our website. You can also subscribe to my YouTube channel. We're going to be putting out some exclusive content on that channel. That will be short form, very digestible bits and pieces, and a lot of my observations on things. So make sure that you find me, Brian J. Matos, on YouTube. You can subscribe to my channel there. We post clips, preview clips of these episodes. And of course, you can find me on all of your favorite social media platforms. You can go to my website to find those direct links, or look in the description of this program, and you can follow me on any of your favorite social media channels. Thank you again for listening to the program. Look forward to speaking with you on the next episode. And for now, I invite you all and encourage you all to remain and stay curious.